Hello, MetaPlaneteers. Welcome back to MetaPlanet Madness, Episode 4. I am one of your co-hosts, Peter Duan. I also go by the Twitter handle, BTC Bullrider. And today, I have always my superstar co-host, ClimbThatLadder. Climb, how are you doing, bud?
Fantastic. How are you?
Good, man. I mean, we just came back from Vegas, and so many people were asking about you, and some of them were wondering if you were AI.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll do a reveal at some point, maybe.
Oh man, oh, that will be a good episode. So I guess everybody will have to stay tuned for that. Well, Klein, if you could please pull up the presentation.
All right.
But for those who are just joining on, we are talking about episode 4, which I call Culture as Alpha and the Answer to the Universe. So next slide, please. As always, there is the same housekeeping notes, but nevertheless, they stay the same. First of all, this is never financial advice. These are just two fellow friends, two fellow Bitcoiners, two fellow investors who are absolutely obsessed with one investment, and that is MetaPlanet. Now, rule number 2, as always, is because we're Bitcoiners, we don't trust. Instead, we verify. So at the end of the day, we are always trying to give you as much factual information as possible. There is no insider information, and everything that we talk about is based either from the community or from the filings. Third, this is a live event that is recorded on X Spaces and will be redistributed on YouTube. The YouTube channel is called Bull Standard, which is the next slide. And finally, we encourage people to come to the live chat because that is an opportunity for you, the community, to ask us questions so that if we do have some time at the end, we will either answer them or sporadically we will shout out various comments throughout the presentation. Finally, we know and respect that we deeply respect your time. And hopefully you respect ours in the regards that if you can support us and you found this valuable, please like and retweet this live stream so that more shareholders can know what we're doing. Next slide, please. So as I said, this is the Bull Standard YouTube channel. This has all 3 of our previous episodes, and we will try very hard to get the 4th episode or each episode out within 24 hours. We are also, me and my business partner is also actively trying to find a way to dub it in Japanese so that our Japanese community can be involved as well. So today we just have 3 simple themes, although these themes can be quite, there's a lot of slides, there's over 70 slides. The first slide is what I call culture as alpha. As you guys may remember from episode 1, despite the fact that I'm the one with the 14 years of traditional finance experience, I find that there is a disproportionate amount of Bitcoiners who are not aware of the importance of the qualitative side of building a Bitcoin treasury company. So today I'm talking about culture. Then the meat and potatoes of today's presentation is the 42 reasons why ClimbThatLadder and I are giga bullish on MetaPlanet. 42, as many of those know, is quote unquote the answer to the universe. So Climb will break down each and one of those reasons. Finally, we are nothing without our community members, so we will be shouting you out at the very end. So I'll start off with culture as alpha. So I had the great pleasure of meeting Jeff. And I thought what he said was very interesting in the private Bitcoin Investor Day event. He said that now there are a lot of these Bitcoin treasury companies that are popping up. So you got to find a way to differentiate yourself. Some people differentiate themselves on the balance sheet side, while others are figuring out ways to generate alpha. So in this particular video, he was talking about Strive, which was finding interesting ways to generate that alpha. One way that Strive is generating that alpha is raising money to buy Bitcoin at a discount. So I think they are trying to buy the Mt. Gox Bitcoin that will be eventually released, but that's currently trading in discount. And then another thing that they're doing is because Strive is founded by Vivek Ramaswamy. I apologize if I pronounce his name wrong, but he has a biotech background. And so there's a lot of biotech companies that are trading below their cash value. So they think that there is a way to generate alpha by buying those companies below net asset value and therefore accreting value back to Strive. So next slide, please. So as I thought about this, and this is kind of a re-adaptation of what I talked about, I think in episode 2, I think now there are what I think 3 levels of Bitcoin treasury companies. So what are they? So level 1 is you're just a Bitcoiner, right? Let's say that you have a company and you just want to turn your company's cash into Bitcoin for your company's balance sheet. Oftentimes, these are just mom and pop companies or stores. What I mean by that is that they have no access to the capital markets, right? They're not publicly traded. And as a result, they have no retail community behind them. They're just simply Bitcoiners. So level 2 is what I call a kind of a standard Bitcoin treasury company. Now, the requirements of a level 2 Bitcoin treasury company is that you have to have capital markets access, which means that you're publicly traded. And also you have to have deep Bitcoin knowledge. So what these 2 elements combine together is what I called quantitative, right? Now, only after those elements are assembled can you then require hardcore Bitcoiners to sell their existing positions to rotate to buy your Bitcoin treasury company. Now, some of them will view this as a trade, which means there's no loyalty to your company. They're just trying to find ways to generate alpha for themselves, while some of them will maybe maintain with you during the bear market. Okay, but only when these 2 elements are working together can you trade above 1 mNAV. And again, why that is important is because the only way you can accretively dilute your stock base to acquire and generate a Bitcoin yield is if you're above 1 mNAV. So that's level 2. Level 3 is what I call the innovators. So this requires you as a company, as a Bitcoin treasury company, to generate alpha, which gives you a higher mNAV than that of a level 2 Bitcoin treasury company. So this is where you need to have a combination of quantitative, as I mentioned before, but also qualitative, which is the loyal Bitcoiners that will sit through a bull market and a bear market. So an example of these, what I call level 3 innovators, in my observation is, of course, MSTR, MetaPlanet, and Strive. And so if I were to summarize what are the 2 major elements that create a level 3 Bitcoin treasury company, it is that quantitative side, which gets you that Bitcoin torque, but also the qualitative side, which I call the cultural torque. And together with these 2 elements gives you a higher mNAV. Why is that important? Because a higher mNAV equals a higher Bitcoin yield, which at the end of the day is higher returns for the shareholders. So let's break down the qualitative side, which culture is that qualitative umbrella, if you will. And under that cultural umbrella, there is 3 major categories. 1 is community, 2 is the lore behind the company, and 3 is the merch or the merchandise. So let's start off with community. You and I are part of this beautiful community, but a lot of times, because Bitcoiners are logical people, when they think about qualitative stuff, their eyes kind of glaze over. But hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea on how it is tangible to the quantitative side. So community, you can think of as a network effect. There's a word for this, which is Metcalfe's law. The next slide actually does a great job of explaining what the network effect is. So let me just read this out loud for those who are just listening in. What is the network effect? The network effect is a phenomenon whereby increased numbers of people or participants improve the value of a good or service. The more popular a business or product grows, the more the users effectively act as salesmen, spreading the word about the entity or item. Here are some key takeaways. The network effect is a phenomenon whereby increased numbers of people improve the value of a good and service. So examples of this is like e-commerce sites such as Etsy and eBay that grew in popularity because it gave access to online networks and attracted consumers to their products. The more popular business or product grows, the more the users effectively act as salesmen, therefore spreading the word about the company. So a good example of this is like Wikipedia, right? Nowadays, especially with the help of AI, the actual code base to create something like Wikipedia is actually quite easy, right? If you just have a couple of smart software engineers and with AI, you can create the framework of Wikipedia. But what makes Wikipedia very valuable is that everybody knows to go to Wikipedia for that knowledge that they're seeking. Another good example of this is Reddit, right? Reddit is also quite simple in how you create a rather simple website. But again, it is the network effect that makes Reddit a multi-billion-dollar company. So the second part is lore, which I describe as the origin story and the interesting characters that make up the story, right? A lot of these companies are zombie companies. MetaPlanet will be the first to tell you that it was a zombie company who was struggling very badly with their line of hotels. But it is only through discovering Bitcoin and through interesting characters like Climb, which you and I don't know if he's truly AI or not, that brings this lore to life. Merchandise is just advertisement, right? And so Simon showed me a very, very interesting screenshot. So they made 20 of these Japanese masks that was given out. I think it was at the last shareholders meeting. And I know it's a bit hard to see, but it actually sold for 7,220 US dollars. Okay. So that's just one example. Another example is MetaPlanet is the sole owner and distributor of Bitcoin Japan. Of the Japanese Bitcoin magazine. The very first edition is now selling for $10,000. I can guarantee you that as I was walking around in the Vegas conference, that many people have personally stopped me regarding these MetaPlanet hats. And these MetaPlanet hats, they were eventually given out on the last day by Simon and his team, and they went away like that. Also, community is edge. So for those who don't know, Mark Rusko is a famous fund manager that manage pension funds and endowments for, I think, University of Notre Dame. He also happens to be on the board of directors. So his tweet is community equals edge. And you and I are perfect examples of that as we help drive up the mNAV. So it is you and I who make up the community, and therefore it is you and I who create that cultural torque, which I think it's literally half of the equation to make a Bitcoin treasury company. All right, that's theme number one, which is culture as alpha. Now I am going to pass this over to my co-host, ClimbThatLadder, regarding the 42 reasons why he thinks MetaPlanet is the answer to the universe.
Awesome. Yeah. And, it kind of just ended up being 42. I'm sure it could have been plus or minus one or something if I combine certain things. There's overlap in some different ideas for sure. But as I started listing them, I found that it was super easy to list the first 2 dozen, and getting up to 30 was also pretty easy. And then the last 10 or 12, I just had to kind of go through old notes and stuff to really see. All right. So the first one, maybe it sounds funny, but is Simon and Dylan. A lot of companies are going to try to hire people who have a lot of followers on X or whatever. And they're not, I don't think, going to succeed with that. They may get their brand a little bit more talked about. But once, like, if for some reason MetaPlanet hired me, I probably wouldn't be able to talk as liberally as I can about them, right? So the fact that I'm not on the payroll is sort of the value as far as I'm concerned. And that goes for a lot of other people that are, sharing MetaPlanet and other company alpha, right? So Simon and Dylan, if you guys haven't seen all these interviews, this is just a few of them over the last few months. They both have a crazy amount of integrity, drive, honesty, and they focus on, the same messages consistently. Bitcoin per share, transparency, calling their shots in advance. So yeah, that's my number one reason, I would say. And these aren't in a particular order, but that's probably still my number one reason. Number two, full and sincere belief in Bitcoin. So they're not just using Bitcoin to pump their share price or whatever. They're using it because they actually believe in it. Dylan, obviously has a background talking about Bitcoin for years, and I think Corey said in the chat earlier that he'd even considered hiring Dylan at some point. So like, Bitcoin is the focus, and they essentially have created a company where they want to take us along for the ride. But they are focused on Bitcoin per share, and there's no mistake about that. Number three, management is in touch with the community. I mean, pictures like this are easy to find, and it's not just taking pictures or having a dinner or whatever with people in the community. Like Peter, got a lot of FaceTime with Dylan and Simon over the last few days, and probably talked to both of them at the Florida conference as well. And MetaPlanet isn't such a huge stock yet, like in market cap and everything, where there's like 5 bodyguards around Simon or anything yet, right? So they're approachable. They have conversations and laugh, and they're normal people. They read what people post about them and their company on X, and they take that feedback and into consideration. Low debt. So the first three is let's see. Strategy currently is around 13%. Semler is around 22% debt to Bitcoin net asset value. Last episode, MetaPlanet was like 1.4%. They had almost no debt. And I know everyone has mixed feelings about that, right? But Simon likes to play it safe, I believe, as aggressive as they are with accumulating, increasing Bitcoin per share. They are very careful about how they do it, and they don't want to ever overextend themselves. So as easy as it is with the amount of volume and everything that they have, to run the accretive dilution machine very quickly, they just don't need to borrow very much to keep very, very, very strong growth. So right now we're in this sort of lull. They finished issuing 210 million shares May 19th. And soon, we expect them to announce their next plan. I'm, hoping it's like 420 million shares or something like that. It'll probably be more than 210, just because I think it only took them about 60 trading days to issue all that to the market. So right now they have upped their debt just temporarily. They're essentially pulling the future forward, and they'll pay off this short-term debt once they start issuing shares, just as part of the cash achieved from share issuance. So right now they're around 10%, which is still relatively low compared to most other players in the space, but it's high for them. Caution, let's see, number 5 is cautious about convertible bonds, and we had this I think in the last episode too. But and here's a clip from Strategy World, where Simon is essentially talking about you want to make sure that whoever buys your CB is aligned with your future, not just trusting or not just trying to capitalize on your volatility. So, that's something that he's very careful about. He's mentioned it I think in the Byworth episode, he mentioned that quite a bit. And if anyone hasn't seen that interview, I think that's his most recent one, is out a week or two ago. Number 6, only sell new shares when the stock is up. This is an interesting thing. So in Japan, they don't have the ATM. They can't just issue shares the same way that we do in the US. They have something called moving strike warrants if they want to dilute their stock. And the way that that Simon and Dylan set this up was that they use a third-party Evo fund, which shorts the stock. And hopefully I say all this correctly, but this is roughly the way it goes. So they short the stock. They borrow shares from a large shareholder. They short the stock, and then they exercise the warrants at yesterday's closing price, and then make everything whole. And then MetaPlanet gets the cash raised at yesterday's closing price. So they only have financial incentive when the stock is up versus yesterday's closing price, and that's by design. And I think one of the biggest things that gets repeated a lot, again, this whether it's valid or not isn't up to me to decide, but the market decides. And a lot of times people get upset when MicroStrategy is red for the day and they blame Saylor hitting the ATM. Again, I think that's largely blown out of proportion. He benefits selling on green days more than he does on red days. But who knows, right? And there's no way to see. It's just that the transparency there isn't the same for various reasons. And you could make arguments that they may be front ran. They're a lot larger company and different things, for better or worse. But either way, I prefer the way MetaPlanet does it. Let's see, transparent share selling, number 7. So the way that this is from one of their disclosures. I think the end of every month, they show the breakdown of shares per day for their different series of stock acquisition rights. So they just finished like series 13 through 17, and each one represented like 42 million shares. Every time they issue 10% of any of those series of stock acquisition rights, they have to report it. So you get, a day or 2 or 3 after they've sold shares, you get to see how many shares they sold that day. So for anyone that's worried that they're, not selling in a wise manner or whatever, you can actually just go through. And that's going back to number 6. I created this chart looking at all their April and May dilution. Of course, it stopped May 19th, so it doesn't go much past that. But and you can really see what's going on under the hood, and that to me is extremely valuable. And there's a lot more research. You could extend it way beyond what I've done there. Number 8 is pretty contentious, but it's proof of reserves. And there's people that I respect on both sides of this conversation. I have my own opinion on it, and it's, not super important, but my opinion isn't that important, but it is something that I like and that a lot of investors do like. And it fits in with the ways that they're extremely transparent, pretty well across the board. I mean, they keep some things close to their chest, but very few. For the most part, they're extremely transparent. And you can just go on and see. And I think they have like 10 different, you can break this down on the mempool and see they have something like 10 different Bitcoin addresses. You can see how they deposit, in smaller amounts, maybe 4 Bitcoin per transaction or something like that. And then it shows kind of the group transactions on this page, I think. Number 9, they're not a struggling company. So they, like Peter said earlier, they were a zombie company and they transitioned away from that. So, there a lot of companies right now are trying to do the LBE game while still having their legacy business, and they'll have some success with that, but I think that their success is going to be limited, and I think their mNAV is going to be limited. And the most basic way to try to convey why I think that's the case is that when you go to invest in one of these companies, you have choices. There's lots of different companies. If why would you invest in a company that is doing this, but also doing a bunch of other unrelated stuff? So if you want to invest in a Bitcoin, in a leveraged Bitcoin company, what's the point of also investing if they're also, a medical company or a different company like that, right? So, I'm not saying it's the worst investment in the world. I think they'll still do very well. I think their transition to Bitcoin is very, very good, and they're still contributing to the space for sure. Just as far as their potential as an investment, it's just not a clean story. And I think that they lose a lot of their traditional investors who would have invested in their traditional business, because most of those investors aren't yet going to understand Bitcoin. And so you just end up with kind of both groups of investors, the ones that wanted the legacy business, the ones that want the Bitcoin story. Both of them sort of end up going elsewhere for more of a pure play in what they're wanting to invest in, right? So, and aside from that, it's just a little bit confusing to look at all the attack vectors and stuff. It's a lot more clean if it's as pure as possible of a Bitcoin company. Number 10, on that same note, they're a Bitcoin pure play. So yes, they do have a little bit of legacy stuff. They have one hotel. I believe they used to have 30 before COVID. COVID pretty well wrecked them, and that's when they, eventually, transitioned into being a Bitcoin company in like April of 2024. So they have one hotel right now. I think they might have like one floor of it still open or something, so they're still getting some revenue from that. And then they're however many floors it is, they're like renovating the other floors. And it looks like Q1 of 2026 now is the planned time when that hotel is going to be finished with its renovation and be a Bitcoin hotel. They also have the license for Bitcoin Magazine in Japan, and I think they got that maybe in Q3 or Q4 of last year. So all this is pretty recent. Like they're establishing themselves, already fortifying this sort of message, this sort of story of not just buying the Bitcoin and storing it away, but also having a couple of things that really help as far as branding, really help draw Japanese investors into Bitcoin. And then, obviously people can connect the dots and see that there's advantages to investing in MetaPlanet versus Bitcoin, specifically in Japan. 11, so few employees, so much value creation. So I think I tried to find the number of employees I have, and one thing said 17. That might have been at the end of 2024. And then one of their disclosures shows 22. So I think 22 is probably the right number, but it's ballpark around 20 employees. And Dylan sent this out. Peter, I'm glad you added this too. I meant to add that this morning. So scarcity scales. So company and market cap per employee, and he didn't include all the companies, but it looks like he went through the NAV or the Mag 7 and added like Nintendo in there, and it's pretty neat. And this is very similar to thinking about Tether. Granted, Tether is a private company, but that's something I've heard about them for the last year or two. Probably is just their profit per employee is insane, and MetaPlanet's very high up there. 202 million per employee for their market cap. Number 12, they sell puts for income generation. I'm not aware of anyone else that's doing this. And if other people try, they may not be very good at it. There's some reasons why I think Simon and Dylan specifically are extremely good at this. You can look at from like a previous episode, but also in their on their analytics page, you can see the orange dots, and you can see that they tend to not buy at the peaks, and they tend to buy a lot when the price dips. And all this is also based on mNAV, so they're going to be careful. If mNAV dipped too low, I don't think you'd see them buy a whole lot in the dips. They'd probably spread those out quite a bit more. But their mNAV stayed really strong, and they're being very picky in when they're buying Bitcoin. Not so picky that it's slow by any means. They're outrunning just about everybody. And so, this slide from their Q1 slide deck shows how much, and I think this converts to something like 5 or 6 million a quarter right now, but that's going to continue to increase. They use about 5%, I think, of their cash raised to sell puts on Bitcoin. And they're not sharing everything they're doing with which strikes. They started to early on. If you look back through their disclosures, just sort of as an interesting note, back in October. They had a couple that actually showed like, them selling a strike here and then rolling it to this and whatever and how much they earned. I think they just realized it would be too tedious, as active as they probably are with this. But yeah, even in sideways markets, Bitcoin goes down, Bitcoin goes sideways, whatever, they're making money, and they're still making money if it goes up. And this is just, with a small percentage, but it's constant money that's coming in to help them with running the company, and creating more Bitcoin, of course. 13, avoid crushing mNAV. And they've talked a lot about this. I know Dylan's interview with Tim Kotzman is one of my favorite interviews, and I think he talks about it in that one, about mNAV, accretive dilution, volatility of mNAV, and just how important that is. And that really opened my mind to rethinking how important mNAV volatility is specifically, because that's something no one really talks about. So I've really just had to rethink all of this stuff and now just incorporate it in how I view the company and how I view other companies. So they shared this, that their target accretion window, meaning, when do they want to dilute shares to buy more Bitcoin? They're aiming for, it's a little hard to see there, but they're aiming for greater than 3 mNAV. And, it's not just 3 to 5, it's 3 to 5 and beyond, right? So as much as they can get. But something that I shared from the last episode is, even if you're able to double your Bitcoin stack, if you're at a 1 mNAV, you double your Bitcoin stack, but you're also doubling your share count. So on a per share basis, your investors don't benefit at all. Not to say there's no benefits from having a larger stack if you can leverage against it later in different ways or whatever. But the immediate effect is no accretive dilution if you're at a 1 mNAV. And, even at a 1.5, it's very low. It's much richer at a 3 and beyond. It's just very, very pure.
I do want to add, Climb, that
Mhm.
historically speaking, they peaked around, I think, like either 9 or 12. And I remember Simon saying that they had an opportunity at, again, either 9 or 12 to slam it back down to 3. But they actively decided against that because that does not align with shareholder value. And so, again, this really speaks to the ethos and the clear transparency of management, that they are truly aligned with a long-term shareholder.
That's fantastic. Yes. And that was from the Richard Byworth interview like last week or so. So again, if like that's one of my favorite ones as well. And there's some real gems in there of, exactly. They were at 12 and he could have slammed it down to 3, but that would not have been good for shareholder value. So they try to be very careful. And there's something else, and I didn't include it in here, but something just to mention real quick is, I think that they have something really valuable when they finish the 210 million plan May 19th. They have now, a couple weeks, few weeks, whatever it ends up being, before they sell new shares again, before their next plan, gets announced, goes into effect and all that. They get really valuable feedback from the market during this time when there's no selling pressure on the market. They sold every single day from up every day in May up to May 19th, 11 trading days. They sold a lot to the market, and the stock went up every single day pretty much against that. It's really neat to see, and I think we went over that in episode 3 if anyone hasn't seen that. But that's basically saying, like, with all the selling pressure, the stock is still rising. So imagine you take that selling pressure away. Obviously, you can't take it away forever because, if investors, if they announce that they'd never issue another share, it would not be good for things, right? We want them to, but they get short term in this gap between share issuance. They get really valuable feedback of sort of where mNAV can go. And I mean, you can just imagine, that's just the surface level sort of feedback they get, but you can imagine how valuable this information is to them. As the company gets larger, the mNAV, cycles, maybe they won't peak up to 10 or whatever. They'll dissipate a little bit, but they're still a very, very small company. All right, so 14, mNAV volatility is vitality. And this is the best way I could show this from August 1st till now. You can see mNAV oscillating, and number 15 greater than MicroStrategy mNAV. And sorry, I still call it MicroStrategy because to me, strategy is just a word, and anyone that isn't familiar with that being the name of another company might get confused. So I'm sticking to it. Sorry for now. But all right, so this graph shows the same thing, August 1st until present day, mNAV, and almost the whole time they stay above. There, a little time where they were kind of fighting with it, but almost all the time they stay above MicroStrategy's mNAV. And I've talked before about sort of three forces of mNAV, and I want to explore this more in the future. But there's certain forces pulling on mNAV of all these companies. There's people that believe the mNAV should be 1, and they're going to short the company and buy Bitcoin or whatever. And so there's always some sort of gravity pulling these companies down to 1, and them perpetuating the yield, being able to provide the yield of Bitcoin per share and sort of the rate of that yield, and the anticipation of future yield is what really elevates things over a 1. So some people view it as a 1, so there's certain forces pulling it down. There's other forces essentially pulling it up to infinity, but there's frictions there that prevent infinity, because as you get a higher mNAV, you can dilute more shares for actually less of a dollar cost to the market in order to provide more Bitcoin. So it becomes much more efficient dilution, because a higher percentage of that share dilution turns into sort of a Bitcoin gain, if you think of it in Bitcoin per share, if you discount the dilution. And then largely comparing, you'll see various slides where I compare MetaPlanet to MicroStrategy, and that's not me bashing strategy. That is literally me using strategy as a benchmark because it deserves that respect. And strategy in turn uses Bitcoin as a benchmark. Their whole goal is to beat Bitcoin. And that's MetaPlanet's goal too, to beat Bitcoin returns. But my goal is, as an investor, I could invest in strategy or MetaPlanet. So why am I over in MetaPlanet? Well, these 42 reasons, but quite a few of these reasons strategy shares as well. And they have different reasons. But seeing the higher mNAV that's justified historically, seeing that their current year-to-date yield is around 190% versus strategies, 17, 18, 19, whatever it is percent, that's still really, really strong. But MetaPlanet's growth story is just beginning, and they still have quite a bit of runway and are just, accelerating really, really quickly. So I think, the next 2 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, something like that is going to be very, very, very good for MetaPlanet. So that's why I made the switch.
So I would like to add, right? Like if you just combine these two factors of at a higher mNAV, you can generate a higher Bitcoin yield on top of a much smaller base of a market cap. Combine these two factors together on a net basis, they should outperform MSTR, which is again why I'm giga bullish on MetaPlanet. And of course, I'm not bashing MSTR. I wouldn't be here. Climb and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for MSTR. But just on like a voting with your dollar basis, I think you get a higher return.
Exactly. Yeah. And a lot of that is a reason we'll talk about in a little bit, that essentially the volume really supports the ability for them to accretively dilute quickly, because the market can only absorb so much so quickly. So the market really determines the speed at which you can dilute. Number 16, focus on increasing Bitcoin per share. And so this isn't just the fact that they're doing it, they're focused on it. It's on their dashboard. Not just the current number of Bitcoin per share. And this is in fully diluted shares, which I think are around 700 million. So if anyone sees different values on different websites, that's why. That'd be the main reason why. But yeah, you can see obviously how quickly that's going. But the main thing here with number 16 is that they're really, really focused on it. Their decisions, every decision they make is, can we increase Bitcoin per share for our shareholders? Can we make every single share more valuable? And here's something that on number 16 as well that Simon shared this in Vegas, and someone was cool enough to film it and put it on Twitter. So I grabbed this from them. But MetaPlanet's Bitcoin per share doubling rate. So I think they double their Bitcoin holdings about once every 60 days. They've had 6 doubles from the start, starting around 100 Bitcoin. If you go to 6,400 Bitcoin, that's 6 doubles. And each double, I think, averages around 60 days for their Bitcoin holdings. Their Bitcoin per share, because of course dilution fights that, right? So their Bitcoin per share is a little slower doubling, but it's still been every 92 days. And of course, that's on a log chart there. But that's, a straight line on a log chart is an exponential. And that's pretty crazy that they're still growing at the same rate as they were when they only had 100 Bitcoin. And now they have 7,800 Bitcoin. And Simon also said, obviously it's going to slow at some point. There's limited Bitcoin on the planet, but they're very much still in their growth phase. So if anyone hasn't seen that clip, that's a good one. We have it posted, I think, in the media section of the Discord, or hit me up on X and I'll share it or something more. Number 17, it's the number 1 stock for last year. So out of 5,500 publicly listed companies globally, they were the number 1 performer. That just adds to their story. It adds to their fame, and it's part of sort of the important history. If you just look at all the benchmarks, everything that they've achieved, them being number 1 in 2024 fits in with that, and it amplifies where you can imagine they're going in the future. I would be surprised if they're not the top stock or one of the top stocks in Japan this year. And so this on the right side is just how they are year to date 2025 versus other Japanese companies, versus the Topix Core 30, which I think is kind of like the Dow Jones in the US. They're crushing everybody. Number 18, strong growth versus MicroStrategy. So yeah, right now, you can see, and this is the ratio of Bitcoin held. So if MetaPlanet held 5,000 Bitcoin and MicroStrategy held 500,000, then it would be a 1% ratio. So that's showing here that, obviously they started very low when they got their first 100 Bitcoin initially in April of last year. And it's been, a very clean sort of exponential growth since then. And currently they're at, 1.3, almost 1.4% of Strategy's Bitcoin holdings. And a lot of people need to see this chart because, they try to do the math and they're like, well, both of them have the same potential. Both of them can sell shares and buy Bitcoin. So why, how is it possible that MetaPlanet could grow faster? And the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the fact that they're doing it. So it's just kind of the easiest way to show that. There's lots of reasons behind it, but here's the evidence. Here's the same thing on a log chart. And again, that's like, so Simon, I believe, has a degree in applied mathematics from Harvard. And I was joking with people yesterday that like, it's almost as if he and Dylan are trying as hard as they can to make the perfect exponential growth company. Because just like the balance that they're staying in, it's impressive. Obviously they're not doing that. It's just amazing how well it's worked out. Find another company that looks like this. And this isn't with 3 or 4 purchases, and here I actually show, so I counted them up. They've actually announced 35 different Bitcoin purchases since April of last year. So, again, there's other companies that are growing very fast and they might have 2 or 3 or 4 Bitcoin purchases. They just don't have the history for me to be interested. They're doing very interesting things, that haven't been done before. And they'll get some investor capital for that novelty. And it maybe they'll pass MetaPlanet, who knows? But I want something as closely resembling Strategy's execution as far as quite a bit of time, nowhere near as long as Strategy, but still quite a bit of time they've been executing, and the number of executions, and being able to just look at that over time. All right, so here's the same thing. Yeah, I guess I didn't really. So clean exponential growth, and this is different than comparing it to Strategy. This is looking on a log chart of just their Bitcoin holdings. And again, super clean line. And I have that showing 48,000 by the end of the year. I think that was my kind of sandbagged bull case, if that makes sense, from like episode 2. But that's if they slow. So if they slow their exponential growth quite a bit, that's where they would end up at the end of this year. And most people can't comprehend that. People generally are really bad at thinking exponentially. So, and to me, that gives a lot of asymmetry. Like if you can gain the ability to think exponentially, that's when people look for 10 baggers in the market instead of looking for 10% in the market. All right, so here's the same thing, but on a linear chart, and you can see how exponential their Bitcoin holdings have grown. And that's pretty respectable. Again, over 35 separate Bitcoin purchases. This is a little bit dated because I think this was from episode 2. So I have on there, it's from May 14th. And they have acquired a little bit more Bitcoin per share since then. But still, number 20 is, can they more than 10x their Bitcoin per share? And I believe they can. Even when I sandbag the models, limit them to about 2 years, even when I have for even the bullish model, if everyone remembers, like even the bullish model had mNAV starting at like a 3.3, it's probably in the mid 5s or something now, but like starting at a 3.3 and dropping every day for the bull case, and the bear case dropping all the way to like a 2 over 2 years, and continually dropping, continually diluting less every single month, and their Bitcoin per share still multiplying by 6, 9, 15, with very sandbag values restricted to a 2-year time frame as well. So if you and people who haven't thought about this, if you think about Strategy's doing a lot of interesting things, they're going to beat Bitcoin. I like them a lot. I would be invested in them over most of the newer companies if it weren't for MetaPlanet. MetaPlanet to me is just the perfect mix of that like growth potential and the history. And so, if you think about something like Strategy and ask, how much work is it going to be for them to 10x their Bitcoin per share? I don't know that they can. Maybe you give something enough decades and it's possible, right? But if you already own 3% of all Bitcoin, even if you buy enough to where you own 30% of Bitcoin, that comes at the cost of dilution. So even if they owned 30% of all Bitcoin, they would not be able to 10x their Bitcoin per share from that achievement, right? They might 2 or 3 or 4x or 5x their Bitcoin per share, depending on mNAV and different things. But it's a different game that they're playing. They're in the lead. And I know, comparing it isn't going to seem fair to some people, but as an investor, I have to justify the mNAV and figure out how much they can achieve beyond the current mNAV, into the future.
Yeah, I just want to note that, when I first looked at that slide, I was like, oh, is that dollars per share? No, it's Bitcoin per share, like increase, right? So yeah, that's not a dollar. That's a multiple on Bitcoin per share.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a lot of these are pretty hard to get people's minds around too. And I thought about showing this chart before in raw yield, but then it would be, however many 1,000%, and that gets kind of confusing too. So I kind of stuck with this just because this fits in with comparing it to mNAV as kind of a single number that represents a multiple. All right, number 21. They're currently number 11 of publicly, let me see if I say this right. They're currently number 11 of publicly traded companies. I think you can see this pretty clearly on bitcointreasuries.net. Sometimes their data on that website can be like a day or 2 or 3 behind, like after a Bitcoin purchase. So just kind of watch out for that if you're using them. But they're a very good resource for comparing a lot of these companies and kind of seeing how everyone's going. So here is a log chart. I mean, you can see it starts at 0.05% and ends up at 100%. So it's a crazy log chart, but you have to do that if you want to show all these things on one chart. So this is MetaPlanet's ratio of how much Bitcoin they have compared to each of these 10 companies that currently have more Bitcoin than them, and including some companies that aren't even trying to play the same game. So Tesla's one of these. But whether it's comparing them to Strategy or to Marathon or XSI hasn't really started yet. They haven't really got their everything going. But still, just seeing this growth and how clean it is with everybody, and they're growing against everybody that is equal size or greater. That's even discounting all the other reasons. This is pretty telling. Like just this graph by itself tells a lot about what they're doing and how consistent they are at outperforming everybody who's bigger than them from a growth standpoint.
Yeah, and to note, they've only been doing this for a little bit over a year, and they're catching up at that rapid pace. You can then using Climb's projections to kind of think ahead on where that trend is going.
Yeah, they're not gonna, 6 months from now, they're not 2 months from now, they're not gonna be in 11th place anymore. A lot of these companies have kind of similar amounts of Bitcoin, like the low 5 digits, let's say. So 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, something around there. So they're going to pass a lot of people this year and next year. I mean, the miners the miners are playing a very different game. I personally don't like miners from an investment standpoint, since there's such better options to me. Are they going to beat Bitcoin as far as returns? Maybe. I'm not even confident necessarily about that, but hopefully for their sake. But yes, there are a lot of miners in there that have put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So I feel like it's an unfair fight almost, because MetaPlanet has so many things in its favor. They don't have all this mining equipment that they have to take care of and worry about all the competition from all around the world, right? So MetaPlanet is playing a game that they can win, and it shows in history. So this is the same thing. Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
just to add real quick. This goes back to Peter Thiel's idea, his book 0 to 1, right? Peter Thiel is obviously a part of the PayPal mafia, one of the greatest venture capitalist investors of all time. He says you want to invest in monopolies, as opposed to the opposite of a monopoly is a highly competitive industry. And probably the most competitive industry is the Bitcoin mining space. And so if you were to think about MetaPlanet, they're dominating Japan. And now they're tapping into German capital markets and American capital markets. And so, yeah, who knows where else they're going to tap into. So it's really quite a monopoly, at least in the Japanese capital markets front.
Yeah, like I'm, starting to think of them as like a bullet train. If you imagine, I'm not going to go into detail about how a bullet train works because I don't want to embarrass myself, but largely it's sliding on air. Or I don't know if they kind of vacuum it somewhat, but anyway, you don't have wheels the same way that you do on traditional trains. And with any advanced technology like that, your goal is to minimize friction. With MetaPlanet, they're minimizing friction. They're not a zombie company anymore. They used to be. They transitioned away from that, and they have almost nothing left of that. And the little bit is turning into what's going to be a Bitcoin landmark, the Bitcoin Hotel. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. That's something worth exploring later. But just really looking at friction from a business standpoint of what other baggage do you have, and what does your execution look like? All right. Number 22, recent highest inflows in NISA accounts. And my understanding is that NISA accounts are kind of a mix between like a Roth IRA in the US and like a savings account. They can invest in companies or, invest in stocks, or just, put it in yen or whatever. I think that they can put in something around $15,000 equivalent every year and invest. I believe that's right. I think Simon said that in the last interview. And invest in things like MetaPlanet. Simon tweeted this out a few days ago that with one of the biggest NISA accounts, they were actually able to see that MetaPlanet was essentially had the most buys, the most inflows into those accounts in the recent week that we had. And thinking about the size company they are, they might be 1 or 2 or 3% the size of like a Toyota over there. It's just, as far as market cap goes. So yeah, let's see.
So hold on, guys. I do know that Climb is very, very very passionate about this, and we also do want to respect your guys' times. So I do think, Climb, that there's enough for episode 2. So maybe we just stop at part 1, which is the first 21 or so reasons. I do want to give us time at the end to give out community shout outs. So if you don't mind, would you mind going to theme number 3, which is community shout outs? Because we do have quite a few people that we want to shout out. As you pull that up, I personally want to shout out the many nice people that was at Vegas. Thank you so much, Anton, for this beautiful little mug. Really appreciate Epoch for creating 50 of these amazing merch t-shirts. Everybody was proudly rocking them at the conference, and everybody was asking me where I got them. And then so shout out to Shant for his very funny book. What should I buy MetaPlanet stock? And in case you're wondering, each and every one of these pages is a definitive and bold yes. What do you have on your end?
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, that works. I mean, this is, 42 is quite a lot to get through. And I try to talk efficiently, but like there's so much to be excited about a lot of these points. That sounds great. It's a great place to sort of end it for this episode. Yeah, so the community shout out in Discord, there's been a lot of cool stuff. Like people have ideas and then other people just run with it without even saying anything. And then they just like share this web app that they created. And so, yeah, you have 3 people here that from Discord who have done a lot. And Naya has done a tremendous amount with the actual web app portion to show or to create this. And you even have pricing now. You can actually click, if people didn't know, you can click on the price and it'll toggle through from yen to euro to dollars and then to native currency for each trade. But yeah, this shows other than 5 days a week, other than like a 2-hour and 20-minute window, I think this stock is trading somewhere on the planet, which is really, really neat. So it's a little over 100 hours a week that it's on the market. Naya also made this, and I didn't realize this until I think like days after, but the episode 2 where I go through all the different graphs of my sandbag pricing model for sort of a bull base and bear case, they just like got as close to that model as possible and just made it into a web app where you can play around with the numbers and stuff. It's super cool. And that's on the easiest way to find all these links is we just kind of keep them on Discord in like one place in like a resources section. But yeah. And then Satoshi Walls made this MetaPlanet wallpaper. And I think they've made it for a few different things. So like, I think maybe they have it for phone and desktop, and they might have the iPad one out now too. I think this morning they actually released another one, but I didn't have time to edit the slides. They have another one that looks pretty neat. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of people are just doing this stuff for free. And that's, to me, a testament to the community and the staying power of this. I mean, you can also look at volume and just how long it's been as strong as it has. But this isn't a quick trade. It will be for some people, but this is not a quick trade for most of us. And yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And again, we want to be cautious of everybody's time. So we always try to end this around about an hour mark. But if you guys do want to continue to support us, we don't ask for anything back other than just hitting the like and retweet, as this will help get us more potential MetaPlanet shareholders. So with that, thank you so much for everyone's time. Again, my name is Peter Duan. I go by the Twitter handle BTC Bullrider, and I have my wonderful gigabrains superstar host, ClimbThatLadder. So if you were to like, share, and also follow us back, that'd be much appreciated. Until next time, which is every Saturday at noon Pacific or 3 p.m. Eastern. Take care, guys. Bye.